This is the moment when the first of 2 bombs exploded near the army headquarters in Damascus on Wednesday. It's 9 months since bombing began in the Syrian capital, these most recent attacks illustrating clearly the capacity of rebel forces to strike at the heart of President Assad and his regime.
The first explosion ripped across the centre of the capital, and there was then an immediate security lockdown as black smoke plumed from the area around the army headquarters. There were troops on the streets in greater numbers, and also plainclothes loyalists to President Bashar al-Assad. There was then chaos on the roads because there were so many checkpoints set up. Some businesses shut down for the day because of that. For all that the regime says that it's about to crush this increasingly militarized uprising against it, attacks like this suggest the opposite.
But with China and Russia still blocking resolutions at the UN Security Council, the international response remains at a standstill.
I think the general sense is that the world community is in a bit of a bind here. On the one hand, everybody's appalled by what's happening in Syria. There are also strategic interests here. But nobody can see how to break what has been for a very long time a stalemate. It's sort of, the momentum is with the rebels sometimes, it's with the regime at other times. But in general, we have been in a situation of stalemate. And most people think there is no military solution, but there also doesn't seem to be a political solution that's possible at this time.
It's a very depressing picture. Really, almost no one is optimistic about this being resolved peacefully or in a short period of time. The conflict is deepening. It's becoming more and more violent. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which is a pro-opposition monitoring group based in Britain, came up with a figure today where they said that the total number of deaths in the 18 months since the uprising began had now passed 30,000. But the most striking thing was that they said that more than half of those deaths had occurred in the past 5 months, which suggests a real quickening of the death rate and destruction, which is certainly consistent with the feel one gets from what's been happening on the ground.
The situation has been further complicated by the changing dynamics in the country's rebel forces, which, although likely armed, practice a guerrilla war, controlling large parts of rural Syria and attacking the regime elsewhere with hit-and-run tactics.
The thing about the rebellion is that it's become extremely fragmented, and you now have myriad armed groups around the country, often with different agendas. It's well documented now the way that some extremists, including jihadists, some foreign fighters have come in northern Syria. There's also this much bigger sense that there's no leader of the opposition. There's no one who can speak on behalf of the opposition. So the real danger here is that this is now slipping into a militia-style war where you have armed groups or nominally opposition in different areas, which may all be dedicated to the fall of the regime, but may also have their own agendas, whether it's to do with power grabbing or a religious agenda or some other kind of political agenda.
This is exactly the dilemma. If there is no measure to end this crisis sooner, then it's very likely that we'll see more fragmentation amongst the rebel movement, but also possibly more jihadis coming in. And the civil war gets bloodier and perhaps even wider and even affects some of the neighboring states. But there are also ways that the length could be shortened, the duration of this crisis could be shortened. One is some spectacular attacks of the style that we saw in July. Perhaps today was an attempt at that. Another is some kind of a diplomatic deal between the US and Russia. So, I mean, there are possibilities, but they're not predictable at this stage.
President Assad has said that he will continue with what he calls the security solution, whatever the cost. The likely drawn-out conclusion of his regime means that Syrians will be paying the price for some time to come. Seb Morton-Clark, Financial Times.